For much of this country, boarding schools are places where affluent families send their children for an exclusive education. For Indigenous peoples, they served as places of trauma and terror for more than 100 years. Tens of thousands of Indigenous children as young as 4 years old were taken from their families and communities and forced into boarding schools run by the U.S. government and religious institutions. These federal Indian boarding schools have impacted every Indigenous person I know. Some are survivors, some are descendants, but we all carry the trauma that these policies and these places inflicted. This is the first time in history that a United States Cabinet Secretary has shared the traumas of our past, and I acknowledge that this trauma was perpetrated by the agency that I now lead. For decades, this terrible chapter was hidden from our history books, but now our administration's work will ensure that no one will ever forget. Over the past 3 years, Interior's Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative has shed light on this horrific era of our nation's history, a federal agenda to assimilate and eradicate Native peoples. My maternal grandparents were only 8 years old when they were stolen from their communities and forced to live in a Catholic boarding school until the age of 13. My great-grandfather was also taken, sent by train thousands of miles away from our small village of Mesita. Many children like them never went back home, and I mourn their passing alongside you. Others, like my grandparents, did return home, and I stand on their shoulders today. As part of the boarding school initiative, we published an investigative report that found loud and unequivocal truth that the federal government took deliberate and strategic actions through boarding school policies to isolate children from their families and steal from them the languages, cultures, and traditions that are foundational to Native people. But as we stand here together, my friends and relatives, we know that the federal government failed. It failed to annihilate our languages, our traditions, our lifeways. It failed to destroy us because we persevered.
Skuktash, Sopam Tekamenyay. My name is Susanna Osif, and I proudly represent the Gila River Indian community, home to the Akimadatam people and the Pipash. I serve as Miss Gila River, and it's such an honor to be here to witness history with every single one of you. As we all know, I have learned through my ambassador roles how much representation matters. For too long, Native Americans have been underrepresented. But today, we are so pleased to have with us Peggy Flanagan, the first Native Lieutenant Governor in the United States. It is my distinct honor to introduce Deb Haaland of the Secretary of the Interior, Madam Secretary, our Auntie Deb. Secretary Haaland's appointment as the first Native Secretary in the history of the United States is a shining example of representation at the highest levels of our government. That brings a sense of hope, a sense of pride, and guidance. Not only is Secretary Haaland the first Native American of the Interior, but she is the first Native cabinet member. And as I've said, representation matters because we are breaking barriers. We are setting a path for future generations, for our people to succeed. And it's so much easier to be able to have that guidance to ensure that we are standing up for our people, our voices are being heard, and our communities are being represented. So it is with pride that I introduce you the Secretary of the Interior, Secretary Deb Haaland.
Thank you. I love you too. Thank you. Wow, that was awesome. Thank you, Susanna, so much. There's no question that your voice is out there and representation truly does matter. Guatsi haupa duhiname etsatuitsa shuimi hanu, ziatimai shuimi hanu. Good morning, relatives and friends. It's such an honor to be here today to join all of you on this important day. Governor Lewis, thank you so much for your amazing and wonderful hospitality. I'm so happy to be back at the Gila River Indian community. Today, we welcome President Joe Biden to the ancestral homelands of the Pima and Maricopa peoples. Every day, but particularly today, I think of the ancestors. We are here because they persevered. Their stories, our stories, are everywhere, in the air we breathe and the land we walk on. We tell those stories because Native American history is American history. President Biden has been a champion for Indian country, committed to doing what is right for our people. It is the honor of my lifetime to serve a president and an administration that truly sees Indigenous people and has worked tirelessly to address the issues in Indian country that have long been underfunded and outright ignored. From infrastructure to education to the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous peoples, Joe Biden has directed historic resources into the hands of tribal leaders who know best how to strengthen their communities. We are developing a 10-year national plan guided by tribal leaders and native language teachers, which will be released soon. The painful loss of our Indigenous languages has been a consistent topic as we have met with survivors across our nation, from Hawaii to Michigan to right here in Arizona. We are also continuing to ensure that our stories are told so that future generations will understand the impacts and intergenerational trauma caused by the boarding school policies. Assistant Secretary Brian Newland and I spent more than a year on what we called the Road to Healing, 12 visits to Indigenous communities, including Gila River, that allowed survivors and descendants to share their boarding school experiences and the aftermath those schools left behind. In collaboration with the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition and with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Mellon Foundation, we are creating an oral collection of first-person narratives from boarding school survivors. We are finalizing agreements between the department, the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, and the Library of Congress to explore how those oral histories can best become part of upcoming and far-reaching educational resources, such as online, traveling, and long-term exhibitions that will share the history and legacy of the federal Indian boarding school system with the world. So many of you have been crucial to this process. That includes the Interior Department staff, many of them Indigenous and here today. who worked through their own trauma to support this initiative. And I am incredibly grateful to my staff for everything they have done from the time this administration started. Today's event would not have happened without each and every one of you, without those who have spoken up, who have shared their pain, and who have been vocal in the face of injustice. Together, we have persevered. It means everything to be with you today and with our courageous president who recognizes the impact these policies have had on each of us. Today is a day for remembering, but it's also a day to celebrate our perseverance. In spite of everything that has happened, we are still here. We are here healing our souls and carrying the strength of those who came before us. We are still here in prayer and ceremony, and we are still here doing our best to speak our languages, even if our parents were afraid to teach us, because that's how we honor those who sacrificed so that we could all be here today. Indigenous peoples have always been here, and today we commit to our shared future. Thank you, Mr. President, for bringing us together. Dawa. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Have you done anything to work with other agencies to tackle the human and drug trafficking in Indian country related to the border crisis?
Since the president has been in office, Congresswoman,
That is a yes or no question. Can you answer?
have-
Would you please answer my question?
Mr. Chairman, can you let the Secretary answer the question?
She's not answering my question.
Congresswoman, since the president has been in office, he has restarted the White House Council on Native American Affairs. These are issues that we discuss. We take an intergovernmental approach to all of Indian country.
What have you done specifically to work with Mayorkas to close the border in order to protect our tribal communities from the cartel criminal activity?
Congresswoman, that is not in the department's mission. We manage our public lands,
So I
and we
take it
also
that that means
uphold the
you've done
trust and
nothing.
treaty obligations of our nation's Indian
You have not
tribes.
done anything to work with Mr. Mayorkas, is that correct?
No, ma'am.
Okay. During your time as secretary, what have you done specifically to work with our tribes to reduce and eliminate criminal cartels from targeting Indian country?
Congresswoman, I want you to know that tribes have been underfunded for decades and decades with respect to law enforcement and justice services. And
So
that is
have
one
you done
area where
anything
we are
specific?
working.
Have you done anything specifically to work with our tribes to address the drug trafficking and human smuggling that is going on related to the open border?
We are working very hard to make sure that Indian Affairs has several approaches to addressing recruitment and retention. We understand that they are understaffed in many of these areas, and we listen to tribes and how they would like us to move this issue
Madam
forward
Secretary,
for them.
what have you done as a cabinet-level secretary to convince Mr. Biden and Mayorkas to close the border in order to protect our tribal communities?
Congresswoman, it is my job to manage our public lands. The Department of the Interior manages our public lands and conserves our cultural heritage and natural resources for the American people, as well as upholding the trust and treaty responsibilities of our
But the Bureau of Indian
tribes.
Affairs is within the Department of Interior, correct?
Yes, ma'am, but
Okay. In 2018, under the previous administration, more than 3,200 pounds of illegal narcotics, estimated to be valued at $9.8 million, had been seized by the Office of Justice Services. How much did OJS seize in 2023?
Congresswoman, that would be up to the Department of Justice, and they can
You don't know?
probably inform you with the number of those pounds.
But you don't know?
I do not know.
Okay. Does DOI's opioid reduction task force still exist?
Congresswoman, thank you. We are working hard with tribes to ensure that that we manage their justice services the way that they want
So
to.
the question was, does the Department of Interior's opioid reduction task force still exist?
Congresswoman, I would be happy to answer that for the record.
Is the answer yes or no?
I will be happy to answer that for the record.
You don't know as you sit here today?
I want to make sure that I give you the correct answer, and I will do that when I get back to my office.
Have you heard of the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan?
No, I have not.
Thank you, I'm out of time. I yield back.
I want to clarify a few things. You are the Secretary of the Interior, correct? You are not the Secretary of Homeland Security, correct? The jurisdiction for border enforcement largely falls under the Secretary of Homeland's department. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
And I think it is profoundly unfair of a line of attack to come in for explicitly targeting a secretary whose jurisdiction is legally bound for not being nominated to a different department. And I think it's profoundly important that we have clarity here on the jurisdiction of the Interior. I also find it very odd that there seems to be this push for you to be coordinating with Secretary Mayorkas when the Republican majority has voted to impeach Secretary Mayorkas on no evidence, with no allegation of a specific crime. And yet, if their allegation is that this is a reckless individual, they also seem to be alleging here that you should somehow be responsible for working with that. So that to me also I find to make no sense, and also cuts to the core of what this whole immigration thing is about here, which is unfortunately not a solution, but politics. And it's about not making sure that we solve this issue, not providing a path to citizenship, not ensuring that we are providing resources to judges to adjudicate these cases, but to continue to restrict the resources and policies necessary so that there continues to be a problem, so that it can continue to run a news cycle. We are better than this. Secretary Haaland, I'm gonna say it because I think it's important too. You are the first Native cabinet secretary in the history of the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Let alone the first Indigenous woman to ever serve as a cabinet secretary in the history of the United States from either party. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, Congresswoman.
I find the notion or the suggestion, and it's not just because of your identity, it is because of your record. Your record. The insinuation that you do not care for, or the insinuation that you are not extraordinarily attentive to tribal issues, to be deeply offensive. It is deeply, deeply offensive. And you are not in a position to speak up for yourself because you are an eminent professional, and I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it because this woman has served on this dais too, and I had a front row seat to how she advocated for Native communities here in the United States Congress too. And the insinuation that that is somehow not central to her mission here is just completely unsubstantiated. And that's a line that we should not cross. It's just not. Tribal consultation is very important, and it is fraught. Different tribes have different standards for consultation. Is that correct, Secretary Haaland?
Yes, Congresswoman. No tribe is a monolith. Tribes are not. They're in different areas of the country. They're all going to have different experiences and advocate for different things.
And so it is extraordinarily challenging when we have such a great diversity of our tribal communities in this country to meet all these different standards of consultation. But the Department of Interior has taken historic measures to meet everyone where they are at. Is that correct? Is that a fair assessment to make?
Congresswoman, when we first got into office, I'll just point out that we had a consultation on tribal consultations. We got tribes together to ask them, what's the best way for us to meet you where you are? And so we take that information and it helps us, guide us through how we do consultations for various issues through the various bureaus and offices, but also in general for Indian country.
Thank you very much, Secretary Haaland. And, while I am sure that there are places where we always can improve, and there are places where we can always make sure that we meet people better, I want us to be very mindful about the individual that we are speaking to here, and to make sure that we're doing that with respect. And with that, I yield back.